Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about our Torah portion and about Israel. If there are any children here that might be a little uncomfortable, parents of younger children that think that the topic is not appropriate for them, totally understand. You can sort of step out for like 10 or 15 minutes. Not going to be graphic at all, but that is going to be the subject matter. Tough time and tough story. Tough time, the time we're living in, and the tough story is the Torah portion that we have for this week, because inside of this week's Torah portion, Parashat Vayera, is the story in Hebrew called the Akedah. Amongst the Jewish community, we call this story the binding of Isaac. Amongst the Christian community, it is called the sacrifice of Isaac. And it is a tough story. And what links, I think, the story and the time is, what do we do when the world that we live in changes in the way that we understand it, when the world that we live in is not what it should be? And the response, psychologically, is grief. And if you take a moment and think about how you're holding up, and how the interactions, especially if you're a member of the Jewish community, or for you to interact with members of the Jewish community, if you apply the lens of grief, it might help us understand where we are at and where those in the Jewish community are holding. And the same is true, by the way, for the Jewish community, I would argue, when we deal with the story of the Akedah. It's a tough story. Its message leaves us angry. Its message leaves us in denial. I don't want to really talk about this Torah portion. Let's talk about Exodus. Let's talk about you should love your neighbor as yourself. Akedah can leave us confused. Can you explain to me the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac? Well, it's confusing. It's complicated. And this idea of responding to the Akedah with frustration, with denial, maybe even a little bit of sadness that really God would test Abraham in such a way, or most importantly, the fog that we feel in trying to explain this story, are all expressions of when we grieve because we are now dealing with the Torah, we are now dealing with a tradition that now is not as it should be. We just come from the story of Noah, the story of Genesis, and yeah, they're all challenging stories, but there's clear redemptive pieces to it. And when we get to the story of the binding of Isaac, it becomes difficult to understand, and the symptoms of grief are present in how we understand it. What I want to propose today is, embedded in the story of the binding of Isaac are actually ways to process grief. And it can be seen through three of the main characters of the story. Who are the first people? Who was the first person to grieve the story of the Akedah? I would argue it was Avraham. Avraham is a prophet. Abraham knows God. Abraham finds God. So when God comes to Abraham and says, I'm going to test you, Abraham knows what this test is going to be. He knows that his relationship with God, with his son, is going to be forever changed. He knows the story of the Jewish people is going to be forever different after this story unfolds. And how does Abraham respond? Hineni. The challenging idea of here I am. Abraham responds when his world is turned upside down with complete acceptance. And it seems very strange. Our tradition understands this in some ways as being heroic. What an incredible feat to be able to accept such difficult terms at that moment. Abraham says Hineni multiple times during this story. And we can go back and forth with was that the right emotion? Was Avram truly present? But what I want to put out to you is that some people do not have the luxury of being angry, of being in denial, of being in the fog. They're challenged with the task of accepting the situation immediately. And the same is true for us in dealing with Israel. Those who are part of the Israel Defense Forces don't have time to go through that process. They need to accept the understanding of where the world is and to be able to respond. Those who have lost people living in Shar HaNegev, immediately we're tasked with burial, which is one way of understanding the truth of the world, of one's life that one does not want to, that is challenging. Or even the people that have been uprooted in Israel. Immediately when you leave your home is destroyed, it causes one to immediately accept what is going on. And even for the Jewish community in the United States, all of a sudden, the wave of anti-Semitism, of understanding what is, the relationship of Israel and its neighbors, is brought to our forefront. It calls upon our children and for us to be ambassadors, to understand a very complicated situation, but to be able to accept and to represent the cause very clearly. A huge rush to be able to say, here I am, and I'm accepting and seeing clearly what is going on. For me, I've struggled to do that. But there has been one way that I have found it easier to accept the current status of what is going on in Israel and the world. And what has helped me is through song or our liturgy. And I want to share with you a couple of examples because I've sort of been in a fog, but when I recite a couple of these verses, I immediately become aware of what is going on in my world. The first occurred when a few days following October 7th, I was at a Shiva Minyan. Now, the Shiva Minyan is the ritual for being present for mourners for the 7 days after they lose someone. And the Shiva Minyan was someone who passed away naturally. But at the end of the Shiva Minyan, we say these words of comfort to the mourner. Hamakam yenachem etchem, may God comfort you. And then we always add, B'sha'ar avalei Tzion Yerushalayim, amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Now, up until October 7th, I've always understood those to be referring to, well, long ago there were mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, and we are now linking our past with the person who is mourning. But as I recited these words following October 7th, I realized that now I am a part of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem, as I am mourning those who lost their lives on that day. And it helped me sort of see the world and the world that I was living in as a result of these ancient words from our tradition. Another part of our liturgy that gave me some clarity and validated the emotions that I was feeling as I dealt with this incredible time. There's a blessing, we say, that we've actually just said it as part of our liturgy. Baruch atah Adonai mechaye hametim. We say, bless you, Lord our God, who is mechaye metim, which means who revives the dead. Now you might be asking this question, especially if it's the first time you're hearing this blessing. Well, wait a second. Does Judaism believe in resuscitation? Well, what's going on here? And we give many different explanations about, well, there's a messianic time that when all will come back, we'll return to the Mount of Olives. And practically, though, there's a time when we say this blessing. When you do this, and you have to say this blessing. And you say this blessing upon seeing someone who you haven't seen in a very long time. Rabbis say Mechayim Eitim revives an old friendship that hasn't been kindled in a long period of time. And this piece of liturgy has guided me to a place of acceptance because it demonstrates my experience. And I don't know if you've been like me, but I feel like I've been wandering in a desert, almost like a zombie, trying to deal with this new world. And anytime I come across spaces like this, when I'm immersed in community, whether it be at Hebrew school, whether it be at committee meetings, all of a sudden, I'm surrounded by people with a shared experience, and I feel some type of link to life. Almost like when a minyan is formed, so someone can say Kaddish, surrounded by people who love and care for you, who are all part of the cycle of life. It has a reviving spirit when we go through that, and the blessing of Mechayim Eitim describes that. And one more piece of liturgy that we all know that has really helped me in my path towards acceptance, and that is the Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel. I don't know about you, but I could say Hatikva 20 times a day. Every time I say it, it helps anchor me, it helps center me. And I am captured not only by its message of hope, but the exact moment it was done for the very first time, which is in 1948. Just the scene. In 1948, the Jewish community was debating amongst themselves internally. How do we create a state? What's the best expression of the state of Israel? Right is debating with left. Religious is debating with secular. I mean, very similar to the debates we've been seeing up until October 7th within the different populations that make up Israel. And then, amongst this debate, an agreement is formed. At this time, they are aware that the window for declaring a state is shrinking because, for one of the reasons, they are surrounded by 5 neighboring countries that are about to invade. Their safety is in danger. And therefore, they come together and they recite this, they declare a state, and the national anthem of Hatikva is played evidently from the basement of Dizengoff's, the original mayor of Tel Aviv's home, and everyone in his main floor sings together. And the story of Hatikva, of a divided population in Israel coming together amongst the threat of external neighbors threatening to hurt them or to destroy them, and coming together in a song of hope. That is something I thought about in preparation for today, is the idea of Hatikva is by having hope, we find strength. It's a little bit different than the American national anthem, which talks about our strength, and from our strength, we get hope. But Israel is linked to this idea of hope. And I found it to be very helpful to connect to the story of Hatikva, to the words of Hatikva, to its message during these difficult times of finding hope during challenging moments. Another way, by the way, of finding Hinenu, finding Hinenu, of accepting this, is through seeing the allyship of others, which shouldn't be lost to us. I think Rabbi Kornberg has referenced this, but one of the blessings that we have seen is our neighbors from Grace Point Church giving us at Beth letters of hope, letters of blessing, letters of allyship and solidarity, which upon reading them has really been a source to allow me to come to terms with what is going on in the Middle East. I'm a graduate and alumni of Cornell University, and it was very frightening to see the recent expression of anti-Semitism on campus. But at the same time, I was also touched by the fact that the governor of New York came to the kosher dining hall where I used to spend Friday night dinner in solidarity with the students. Mr. Rogers says along those lines, during moments of crisis, who do we look for? We look for the helpers. And every time I find a helper during these difficult moments, I'm able to come, it helps me to accept what is going on in this world. But sometimes we can't follow the pathway of I accept right now. Sometimes that ask is too much. And there's another character in the story of the Akedah that I'll just speak about briefly, Yitzchak. Yitzchak means he will laugh. What is laugh? Laughter is an expression of joy. He will find joy. Now you read the story of the binding of Isaac, and Isaac is not laughing. He is very silent. He says very few words. And you can read the story of the Akedah as if Isaac has never truly accepted what is going on in this story. And he is voicing to us, in my opinion, those of us who are still struggling to find acceptance. It's nice to be able to accept, but sometimes the task is too great. And what's great about his name, though, is he represents those of us who don't understand, who are living in a fog, but know that sometime in the future we have a faith that we will come to understand it. We will come to terms with understanding our world. And similarly, with Isaac, we read his story and we hope that at some point he will be able to accept and find joy once again, which, by the way, he does. Lastly, and most importantly, there's another character in the story, which is the ram. And the poet Yehuda Amichai writes a beautiful piece describing his role. And I want to end here because it offers a beautiful model of managing grief during these difficult times. The name of his poem is Hagibor Ha'amita, the real hero. According to him, the real hero of the binding of Isaac was the ram, who didn't know about the collusion between the others. He was volunteered to die instead of Isaac. I want to sing a memorial song about him, about his curly wool and his human eyes, about the horns that were so silent on his living head, and how they made those horns into shofars when he was slaughtered, to sound their battle cries or to blare out their obscene joy. I want to remember the last frame like a photo in an elegant fashion magazine, the young man tanned and pampered in his jazzy suit, and beside him the angel, dressed for a formal reception in a long silk gown, both of them looking with empty eyes at two empty places. And behind them, like a colored backdrop, the ram, caught in the thicket before the slaughter, the thicket, his last friend. The angel went home. Isaac went home. Abraham and God had gone long before. But the real hero of the binding of Isaac is the ram. The ram did not ask to be an actor or a victim of the binding of Isaac for his grief, and yet he was called upon to deal with it. The same is true for us. We did not ask for this war, for the rise of anti-Semitism, for everything, but we are still responsible for living in this world, and this is the world we live in. For this lot assigned to us, we are a nation of heroes like the ram. Am Yisrael Chai, Shabbat Shalom.